I remember the exact moment it happened. The classroom was quiet except for the soft scratching of pencils and the hum of the overhead fan. I was sitting in that tiny chair across from my son's teacher, holding a folder with his latest assignments, trying to focus on the graphs and handwriting samples in front of me. Then she looked up, hesitated, and said the words I'll never forget, "Are you his uncle?" I laughed. At first, nervously. Maybe she had misheard me, maybe she meant something else. I even glanced at my son, who was coloring with a pencil clutched in both hands, blissfully unaware, humming a little tune to himself. He looked up, smiled at me, and my chest tightened. That smile, it was mine. Wasn't it? That laugh, those little teeth showing, it had to be mine, but the teacher didn't laugh. She looked away, fiddling with the edge of a paper, voice low and hesitant. "I'm sorry." He told the other kids that his real dad visits sometimes. I didn't know how to phrase it. The air seemed heavier. I could feel my palms sweating inside the folder, the slight stickiness of the vinyl chair beneath me. I wanted to brush it off, to call it a misunderstanding, but a cold seed of doubt had been planted. My son, my little boy, had told classmates something I didn't know. Something I couldn't immediately dismiss. I tried to push it away, telling myself it was nothing, but the thought lingered. Uninvited, what if he wasn't lying, and the hardest part? I couldn't shake that smile he gave me that morning. That innocent, trusting smile. I kept replaying it in my mind, wondering if I had imagined it, or if it had been meant for someone else. Most mornings, it was the same routine. I'd wake up before him, careful not to wake my wife, and make a small breakfast while he rolled around in bed, stretching like a tiny tiger in the sunlight. He always wanted cereal with just a little too much milk, and I'd tease him about spilling it, though I secretly loved the little puddles on the table. We weren't perfect, of course. Life was messy. Bills, deadlines, and my night shifts sometimes kept me from bedtime stories or soccer games. But I thought we had a rhythm, a bond that couldn't be shaken. I had his laughter in my ears, his sticky little hand in mine on morning walks to school. I remembered his first steps like yesterday, and I could still see the wonder in his eyes the first time he rode a bike without training wheels. My wife and I had a kind of quiet understanding. She handled the day-to-day chaos, snacks, school forms, laundry that never seemed to end, while I tried to carve out moments that felt just ours. Weekends were for pancakes and Lego towers that leaned dangerously but never fell. Sometimes we'd all pile onto the couch, and he'd fall asleep halfway through a cartoon, his head on my shoulder. Those moments felt permanent, like nothing could ever undo them, yet, even in these ordinary routines, I sometimes noticed small frictions. A text she quickly hid when I came near, a pause in her voice, a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I told myself it was nothing. Stress, work, the endless chores. Nothing to worry about. But now, sitting outside the classroom after the teacher's words, those tiny unease points felt like pinpricks, sharper than they ever had before. I kept looking at my son, remembering the way he'd run toward me that morning, backpack bouncing, hair sticking up in all directions. I thought I knew him. I thought I knew her. I thought I knew our little life. But somehow, in a single question from a teacher, all of that certainty began to crack. I prided myself on knowing him better than anyone else. I could tell when he was pretending to be asleep just to avoid brushing his teeth. I knew the exact tone to use when he stubbed his toe, the words that would coax him out of tears without making him feel embarrassed. I had memorized the rhythm of his laughter, the way it changed when he was excited, scared, or proud. Even at work, when I was exhausted from night shifts, I'd make it a point to call him, hear about his day, listen to his little triumphs over a tricky puzzle or a tiny act of kindness he'd performed. Those phone calls were sacred. Sometimes he'd babble on while I half listened, but I caught the important things, names of new friends. A favorite drawing, the way he pronounced words wrong in the most adorable way. I stored every detail in my mind, like a collection of little treasures. On weekends, I built forts with him in the living room, our knees bruised from crawling around, our hands sticky with glue from craft projects that always ended up messy. I taught him to ride a bike, careful hands hovering just behind him until I let go, cheering every wobble and fall. I thought these were the moments that defined fatherhood, the things that made me indispensable, the kind of bond that no one could replace. And yet, as confident as I felt, there was a fragile thread woven through it all. It was pride tinged with fear, the fear that one day I might not be enough, that something could slip through my fingers, unnoticed, that could change everything. But I told myself I was safe. I was present. I was dad. That had to count for something. I smiled to myself, thinking about him brushing his teeth that morning, the sticky cereal he spilled, the way he threw his arms around me when I kissed him goodbye for school. I was convinced that these moments, this intimacy, guaranteed that he knew who I was. And yet, there was a small, nagging thought I couldn't shake, a whisper at the back of my mind: what if the teacher was right? A few days after the teacher's comment, I tried to bring it up at home. I casually mentioned it over dinner, watching my son shovel spaghetti into his mouth with that determined focus only a 6-year-old can manage. My wife's fork froze midair. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp, startled, almost guilty. It's nothing, she said quickly, voice tight, forcing a laugh. Probably just a misunderstanding. Kids say the strangest things. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, trying to keep the tension out of my voice. But inside, something pricked at me. She wasn't just brushing it off, there was a pause, a stiffness in her posture, a flicker of panic in her eyes before she smiled. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more my mind replayed every interaction, every glance she had ever given when I asked a simple question. Later, I caught her glancing at her phone in the hallway, quickly flipping it face down when I passed. A text, maybe. Something she didn't want me to see. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a friend. Maybe work. But the seed of doubt had rooted itself, growing quietly in the back of my mind. That night, I watched my son sleep. His little chest rose and fell, the soft rise of his eyebrows, the curl of his tiny fingers around his blanket. I wanted to touch him, to reassure myself that he was mine. And yet, I couldn't fully shake the thought that had been whispering since the classroom: what if she was hiding something? What if all the moments I thought meant everything weren't the whole truth? I forced my eyes closed, trying to push the thoughts away. But even as sleep threatened to take me, I felt it, the faint, almost imperceptible tremor of unease. Something was off, and I couldn't tell if it was real or just the creeping fear of losing the life I loved without realizing it. It started with little things, tiny, almost meaningless details, but together they began to weigh on me. I noticed my wife slipping out of the room when I walked into the kitchen, muttering something about a phone call she needed to take quickly. The way she smiled at me sometimes felt rehearsed, as if she was practicing calm for my benefit. One night, I came home early from a night shift, hoping to surprise them. The house was dark, quiet. I heard voices in the living room, my son's laugh, soft and familiar, and another voice, one I couldn't immediately place. I froze, straining to hear, but it stopped the instant I approached. My son's giggle lingered, then silence. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A neighbor stopping by. A friend's call. But my gut twisted, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I kept replaying the teacher's words: visits sometimes. Visits from who? And why hadn't I known? I began noticing more small inconsistencies. A receipt I didn't recognize tucked into her bag. A shadow outside the window while I was cleaning the backyard. She always had excuses ready, quick and sharp, but there was a hesitation, a pause that felt heavier than the explanation itself. One evening, I asked casually, "Was anyone over while I was at work last night?" She smiled too brightly. "Just me and him," she said, patting our son's head. "You know. Nothing unusual." But the way she avoided my gaze made my chest tighten. The warmth of our home, the sense of safety I had built, felt suddenly fragile, like a window left open in a storm. That night, I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the house and the faint hum of traffic outside. I kept imagining the worst: someone else, someone who wasn't me, sharing those bedtime stories, those smiles, those little moments I thought only belonged to me. And the thought was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but I also wanted to pretend, to convince myself it wasn't real, because what if I was overthinking? What if the teacher had misunderstood? But the seed was planted, and no amount of denial could erase it. Finally, I cornered her one evening after our son had fallen asleep, the soft hum of the night stretching through the apartment. My voice was quieter than I intended, but the tension had been building too long to stay calm. I need to know. What did the teacher mean? Who is he visiting with? She froze, biting her lip, eyes darting away from mine. For a moment, I thought I'd pushed too hard. Then she sighed, leaning against the doorframe, shoulders tense. It's my cousin. My sister's boy, he's been around before. I didn't want to confuse him with your son, but when you work nights, sometimes I let him stay over, just for a few hours. I blinked. Relief washed over me like warm sunlight. A cousin. That explained everything, the teacher's comment, the mysterious visits, the shadows I'd glimpsed. My chest unclenched, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease, at least a little. So. It's not anything else? I asked cautiously. No. Just him, she said, voice softening. I should have explained sooner, but I didn't think it mattered. You've been so busy, and he's been helping out, that's all. I nodded, forcing a smile. The house felt lighter somehow. The knot in my stomach loosened. Maybe I had been reading too much into it, imagining worst-case scenarios where none existed. I even laughed quietly to myself, thinking how my imagination had almost ruined a perfectly ordinary life. And yet, even as I hugged her that night, I noticed the way she hesitated when she let go. A flicker of something, guilt. Maybe just fatigue, but it didn't fully vanish. I brushed it off. After all, I had the explanation I wanted, the puzzles seemed to fit together. I could breathe again, but deep down, a tiny, uninvited voice whispered, something about it still didn't feel right. Something was missing, though I couldn't quite name it. At first, I tried to let it go. The cousin explanation made sense, or so I told myself. But life has a way of unraveling certainty in the quietest moments. I began noticing things that didn't add up, small cracks in the story that gnawed at me like persistent teeth. One evening, I was going through my son's backpack while he was napping. A crumpled note fell into my hand, a permission slip for an after-school program I didn't recognize. The sender's name didn't match anyone I knew. I tried to brush it off, but my pulse quickened. My mind raced. Why hadn't she mentioned this? How could a cousin be involved with this? A week later, I came home early from a night shift again. I passed the playground outside our apartment and caught a glimpse of a man crouched at my son's eye level, laughing as he showed him something in his hand. I froze, heart hammering. The man's face was mostly hidden, but the shape of his shoulders, the tilt of his head, it was unmistakably someone familiar. Someone I had never met. When I confronted my wife that night, her calmness faltered. She stammered, said it was nothing, insisted I'd misread the situation. But her hesitation, those micropauses, the way she avoided my gaze, spoke louder than words ever could. My stomach churned as I tried to reconcile the life I thought I knew with this creeping, gnawing suspicion. I found myself lying awake again, staring at the ceiling, tracing shadows in the dim light. Every laugh, every bedtime hug, every moment I had thought defined our little family, suddenly felt fragile. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, someone, was missing from the picture. And the longer I waited, the more I felt like a stranger in my own home. That night, I realized something, even with the cousin story, the teacher's words, the glimpses outside. I didn't know the full truth. And the truth, whatever it was closer than I could imagine. It all came crashing down one Thursday night. I had just finished a night shift, exhausted, and came home earlier than usual, thinking I might catch a quiet moment with my son. The apartment was dim, the hum of the heater low. I stepped into the living room, and froze. There he was. Not a cousin, not a friend. A man I had never met, kneeling beside my son on the floor, showing him how to tie his shoelaces. My son's laughter filled the room, the same laughter I had thought belonged to me. And suddenly, everything snapped into horrifying clarity. The man turned, looked at me with a startled smile, and my son ran into my arms anyway, clutching my leg as if he had done nothing wrong. My wife emerged from the kitchen, her face pale, and I felt my heart lurch into my throat. I can explain," she stammered. But the words came too late. I sat there, frozen, as the pieces fell together. The teacher hadn't misunderstood. My son wasn't imagining things. The real dad my son had talked about in class had been visiting him during my night shifts, quietly, secretly. My wife had known. She had tried to shield me, tried to protect me from the truth, or maybe protect herself. I didn't know anymore. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to collapse in disbelief. Instead, I sank into the couch, staring at the two of them. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, insidious, creeping through every bedtime story I hadn't told, every hug I thought was mine alone. My son looked up at me, confused, innocent, and I felt my chest tighten with a crushing mixture of anger, grief, and guilt. My wife reached out, trembling. "I didn't think you'd ever find out. I thought it would be okay." But I couldn't hear her. All I could feel was the loss of certainty, the shattering of the life I had believed in. The truth wasn't just about infidelity or secrecy, it was about the fact that someone else had been living in the most intimate corners of my fatherhood. While I had remained oblivious, and as I sat there, heart pounding, staring at my son's trusting face, I realized something even worse. Nothing could undo the moments he had shared with him, just as nothing could undo the trust one had lost. The days that followed felt like moving through fog. I went through the motions, getting my son ready for school, preparing meals, trying to smile, but everything felt hollow, shadowed by the knowledge I couldn't unhear. Every laugh, every hug, every bedtime story felt layered with betrayal I hadn't even noticed until now. My wife tried to explain again and again. Each time, her words sounded fragile, like she was testing them against my disbelief. "I thought it would be easier this way. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought you were safe in your sleep schedule, and it seemed harmless." But her excuses, rehearsed or not, collided with the image of my son's small hands in another man's grip. I couldn't reconcile them. I found myself obsessing over details I hadn't noticed before. The little phone calls, the extra errands she claimed were work stuff, the notes from school I hadn't checked. Everything suddenly seemed suspicious, and I realized just how little control I had had over the truth of our life. At home, we moved through tense silences. Conversations became measured. I would speak, and she would nod, her eyes darting to the floor. I'd pause, unsure if I could trust even her words. And my son, innocent, unaware, continued to smile, hug, and call me dad. The weight of that contradiction nearly crushed me. He was mine, yet somehow not entirely mine in the ways that mattered. I started avoiding the night shifts when I could, just to watch him, to reclaim some fragments of fatherhood I feared had been stolen. But each evening, I would catch myself staring at him as if seeing him for the first time, wondering what moments were truly ours and which belonged to someone else. And the worst part, I didn't know how to fix it. How do you rebuild trust when it's been quietly eroded for months? How do you reconcile love with betrayal, innocence with secrecy? I couldn't see a way forward, only the long, aching shadow of the truth stretching across every corner of our home. Now, months later, our home feels quieter, heavier, even when my son laughs or runs through the hallway with his little backpack bouncing. I still tuck him in at night, still hear about his day, still watch him grow, but there's a distance I can't bridge. Not from him, not from her, and certainly not from the version of myself I thought I knew. I ask myself questions I don't have answers to. Was I wrong to assume the worst? Did my suspicion hurt him, my son, even more than the secrecy itself? Can trust ever be rebuilt after months of hidden truths and stolen moments? And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers, am I holding on to anger because I fear losing him, or because I fear that part of him will always belong to someone else? Sometimes, I catch myself watching him play with his toys, the way he used to sit on my lap for stories. I remember the smiles, the sticky little hands, the bedtime routines, and I wonder, does he even know the weight of what happened? Does he feel the cracks I feel? Or is he still too small to notice, shielded by innocence that I can't reclaim? I don't have answers. I only have choices. I can try to pretend the past months never happened, to force myself back into normalcy. Or I can face the truth, fractured and painful as it is, and try to navigate a reality that will never feel the same, and every night, as I close his bedroom door and hear the faint whisper of his breathing, I ask myself quietly, how do you love someone completely when you realize part of them has always been living in someone else's arms? The questions hang in the air, unanswered. The world moves on. But at home, in that quiet apartment, I still feel the weight of a truth I can't undo, and maybe never fully forgive.